No Enemy But Time by Michael Bishop. So this is the 13th book that I've read in a series I'm doing called The Masterpieces of Science Fiction. It's 140 books that I'm going through, and I will leave a link to the announcement video down in the description if you haven't already watched it. This is the first book I've read from Michael Bishop. He published this book in 1982, and it won the Nebula Award for Best Novel. I also have this book club edition of the book, and you can tell the artwork is quite a bit different, and I think I'll mention a little something about that later in the review. Now, if you saw the little blurb on my thumbnail, I said this book is like a flawed diamond. First off, that's kind of a nod to how many similes were thrown out in this book. And second, I think this is a beautiful, valuable, amazing book with some flaws. And so that was the best simile I could come up with for that. Now, I think when I get into the pros and cons and who I'd recommend this book to, that's where the flaws will come out. And you'll be able to tell if maybe this is something that you want to try reading. But let's first off just get into the plot. So it has a very straightforward plot. We start off, there's a prologue, and then we are introduced to our main character, who's the main character for the whole novel. And his name is Joshua, and at times he also goes by John. So when we first meet our main character, he is in this fictionalized country on the eastern side of Africa. And he's getting some outdoor wilderness training by some local tribesmen. Then you kind of learn pretty quick that he's getting ready to do this experimental time travel. The main goal of this time travel is to make contact with this fictionalized proto-human hominid race that Michael Bishop made up, and he calls them Homo zerricalensis. And then what happens after that, we alternate chapters. So one chapter will be in this timeline where he's getting ready to go back in time, and then he goes back in time 2 million years. And then the other timeline, or the other chapters that we alternate between, go back to his childhood when he was a little baby, and then it comes all the way back up to where he goes to do this time travel. And what's interesting about him is his childhood. So we learned really quick that his dad is a black military U.S. citizen who was stationed over in Spain, and his mom was a mute prostitute. And they had an encounter, she got pregnant, the dad's long gone, who knows what happened to him. And his mom is left there, being mute, being poor, being a prostitute, and she realizes that she doesn't have the means to take care of him. So she goes over to this U.S. base housing area and walks down the street and drops him off with some kids that are playing out in the street and takes off. And so there's this military family that ends up adopting him. And they move back to the United States, and like most military families, they're bouncing all over the country. And so you kind of get to follow him throughout his childhood in each different town they're in, and what really brought him to be in this situation where he's getting ready to go back in time. Now that's the overall plot of the book. The majority of the book, it's basically kind of split between him being back 2 million years ago and his childhood and how he was raised. And then towards the end, we get kind of these two plot lines kind of converge, and then we just have like this ending at the end. And a long coda at the very end, or a longer coda, because most of these chapters are really short and really easy to read. The book itself was like 338 pages. And yeah, so that's all I want to say really about the plot. I don't really want to spoil much about the plot. I will say a little bit more about the book when we get into these pros and cons. So let's just go ahead and get into that. So first off, let's go over some pros. I enjoyed just the act of reading this book so much. The pacing, the narrative structure, the way it's split up, you're kind of seeing how he got into this situation, always kind of kept you wanting to read more. I really liked his wit. I think that's something that a lot of people have issue with. And so I found one little section that might give you a little taste of some of the writing. And I'll just go ahead and read it to you. So this is when he's back 2 million years ago interacting with these hominids. And they don't really communicate, they don't speak English, of course, so they do a little sign language. They've kind of got a couple words down, and they use facial expressions. But he's basically observing them a lot. And so our character, he's sitting there kind of observing them, and he says, "You could see their thinkers thinking, whirling towards better mousetraps and self-propelled family vehicles, and maybe even unspoken unified field theories." So there's a lot of that kind of thrown in. There's, random facts that don't seem to have anything to do with the story that that are brought up, but and they really don't. A lot of them don't have anything to do with the story. It's just kind of just randomly thrown out things and ideas and the similes. But I absolutely love that. I also think that this wasn't a very complicated book. There wasn't too many characters. The plot line was really straightforward when you got into it. I never felt lost in this book, and I basically just devoured it. So another pro I would say is the time spent 2 million years ago, the world building, the research he did to show us that landscape, the creatures, and these proto-humans was done really well. I have done some research about this book and Michael Bishop since I finished reading it, and I don't think anybody really has any issue with that. I think that's a universally accepted thing, that he nailed that aspect of the book. So those are two big pros for me that basically carried the whole novel. And now let's get into some cons. If you can imagine, he's 2 million years back with proto-humans, and there is a bit of a love story that goes on in this book. And so I think some people don't really like that and had issues reading about some things like that. To me, I don't know, I didn't overthink that part of the book. I think overall it needed to be in the book for the way he wrote it, and to get to the end of the book, it needed to be there. But I think a lot of people have some issues with that. There are some racial issues that are brought up, but not in a negative, outdated way. But in this day and age, with people being extra sensitive, I think that could be an issue for some people. The wit is a decisive thing, so that could be a negative to some people if you don't like that kind of style and humor. Like I said, I loved that. The ending could be a con for some people. I think the overall plot was resolved fairly satisfactory, but there are some other things, and especially when it comes to the science fiction part of this book, that could be left unresolved or unexplained. But when I got done with this book, I felt like this was more of a literary book with just a dabbling of science fiction. And it didn't really bother me that some of that wasn't completely explained and resolved. So some people might have issues with that, but for me, it wasn't an issue. I think that's about it for the cons for this book. Now, who I would recommend this to? I think, like I said, this is more of like a literary book with little dabbles of science fiction just to kind of help hold up the plot. But it's not, you're not going to it's not going to really read like a science fiction book. So if you're into science fiction and you like the literary aspect that science fiction leans on sometimes, and some of those cons don't bother you, then this would be a great book for you. If like for me, I mean, this was nearly a 5-star read, and if you've been following the channel and you know some of my likes, then and we're on, then give this a shot. So if you're not really an avid science fiction reader, I don't think that has much to do with this book at all. I think if you can get over those cons, I think you should give this book a shot, because it was one of the biggest surprises so far in my reading experience this year. I was really debating of whether or not this is a 5-star read for me. I think it's really close. I might change my mind and switch it later. I reserve the right to do that at any time. I can't wait to read more of Michael Bishop, because I meld so well with his writing style. I hope his other books are kind of along those same lines. If they are, I think I'm going to absolutely love him as an author, and he'll be one of my favorites probably. And this cover, I think, perfectly captures the gist of this story. I used another alternate artwork in the thumbnail that I think is okay. And then this is kind of a head scratcher. I mean, I don't want to give much away, but you kind of wonder why they chose that for the artwork for this book. But they did. So that's about it for that review. Next, I'm on to Rogue Queen by L. Sprague de Camp. This is a very small 150-page book. I should blaze right through that. And I'll have a review out for that soon. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.